Good afternoon, and welcome to Third Eye Thinkers. I'm your host, Michelle Welch.
Hi, and I'm Megan Benanti.
Can't even get that out of my throat just now.
Sometimes we get hung up on who we are.
There you go. So today we decided we kind of switched gears a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us, Megan, what inspired you today?
Well, I heard the news about Kate Spade, and so we decided to talk about suicide and, the depression and things that kind of lead up to that, because, suicide's going to be that final act. So, but there's a lot of reasons why we get to that point, or people get to that point. And in our business, that's something we have to deal with. And, helping people to move through that and beyond to make a decision towards life and, how to work through some of those issues. So what crystals did you bring today?
So as I was thinking about this topic, I want to just validate what you said in our business, because we do see a lot of people, especially I feel like this year, for me at least, it seems like there's been a lot of really discouraged people, a lot of people that kind of feel hopeless, a bit of hopelessness. There's a lot of hope too, but there's been a lot of just hopelessness or those feelings where people are just being honest that that's how they're feeling. And I will just say, and I'm sure this is true, Megan, for you, and we're going to have the number for this also, but I always have available in my practice numbers for crisis hotline, a domestic hotline, suicide hotlines. So we'll put those at least the National Suicide Hotline number up later. But when I was thinking about the crystals, I was thinking about, what gets us to that point of where we are just in pure, a hopeless state, or even those of us who are surviving suicide. Let's put it that way. But before that, I thought, well, kind of what would help us to not get to that point? Now, a crystal is not going to be the cure for, and I would never ever represent that right. to get someone out of a complete depressive state, and all the things that go along with leading up to a suicide. So I'm not in a plant, all right?
Right.
But I will say I brought a crystal today, and I usually have on the bracelet, and I actually don't today, is because I suffer from a little depression too myself. I have a history of it. So this is a topic that's near and dear to me. And lepidolite is actually, and I'm going to see if I can show it here, but lepidolite, yes, is actually a stone that is what lithium comes from. It's one of the biggest sources of lithium, including lithium batteries, like even are used on airplanes, all the way to medicine. Okay, so lepidolite is a beautiful stone that can help with stress and anxiety. We have a lot of people who have major anxiety. I realize that's a little different than depression, but it'll help with depression also.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I also brought yellow calcite and obsidian. It's obsidian, but it's called Apache tears. Now, obsidian is a pretty harsh crystal, but the Apache tear form is known from the Native Americans when they were being driven out of their lands. Allegedly, the story goes that they would cry, the women would cry, because they were primarily the women that were left. Right. The women would cry, and as their tears hit the ground, they would turn into these Apache tears, okay?
Oh, wow.
So that's, but you combine this beautiful yellow calcite and an Apache tear, which are usually black. This one's a really pretty one that I have today because it's really tumbled, real smooth. And it's great for grief, and it's any kind of grief. So, grief from losing a job, grief from a breakup.
Right.
It doesn't just have to be grief from, a passing or a suicide, but it will work for that too. It's also affiliated, yellow calcite, with Archangel Azrael, who kind of gets a bad rap. He's the angel of death, but he's not that sickle and hooded guy we think of. It's an energy being that helps. He's the patron archangel for ministers, those who help in hospice, all those kinds of things, and those who help in the mental health industry.
Oh, wow. So he helps people pass.
Yeah, he helps them transition, and he comforts those who are left here. And,
Right.
so any type of grief. Yeah.
Okay.
And I
Cool.
actually wore my bracelet today. This is
Oh, that's
one of the
beautiful.
bracelets from Soultopia, and I wore that one, the yellow one, the yellow and black. And we sell a lot of those for people just struggling with grief in their life.
Well, and that's grief is such a broad term, and automatically everybody takes that to where we're talking about death. But we do grieve jobs, we grieve relationships, and we have to acknowledge that suffering and that loss for what it is. Uh, well,
What plants did you bring today?
I brought St. John's wort, and that's a real common one. We see that, in pill form in Whole Foods and natural grocers. But it's a great landscape plant too. I use that a lot in Texas. The Latin name is Hypericum, and it makes kind of a low-growing green shrub with bright yellow blooms. And so, and in Texas, we have to plant it in partial shade. It does need some sunshine to bloom, but it's a pretty cool plant. So it's known for relieving depression, and it's one of those that, just like an antidepressant, it takes like 2 to 4 weeks to build up in your system. And so you've got to kind of give it a good try before you give up on it. Now, it can't be mixed with a lot of antidepressants, though. So, it's one of those that you'd actually, if you're on an antidepressant of some kind, you'd have to check with your doctor first. If you're pregnant, you'd have to check with your doctor first. But it helps with things like nerve pain. It helps to control stress. It actually says that it can promote bone marrow and intestinal lining from X-ray damage.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so maybe something good if you know you're taking X-rays in the next month to kind of prep your body with that. And then topically, the oil can be used to help wounds heal when you have cuts and abrasions. And one interesting thing about it too is if you take it in large amounts, it can make you more sun sensitive. So you'd have to be aware of that to high sun exposure and use your sunblock.
Right.
I don't know if that means it's going to spot your skin or not. But I researched both on anxiety and depression, and I was looking through prescriptions for nutritional healing, and which is that big giant book they sell at like Whole Foods and stuff. Such a great book. But anxiety is a side effect of depression. And I had a lot of depression growing up, but I also had a lot of reason for that. And spent a long time really developing skills to manage it.
Right.
And tried many things over the years to assist myself with that. And it was interesting to do research about it because things like manic depression, and there was something called double depression, which is because we have this sort of mild depression that a lot of people have that's kind of, it's not intense, but it can go on for years for people. Double depression can be where it goes on mildly, but then you have these really heavy bouts. And I know that's more what I struggled with in my youth. And then as I've gotten older, everything just kind of moved on and subsided as my skills grew and increased. But so taking St. John's wort, that's one that's going to assist and help to, lift your spirits. It will help with anxiety too. I chose St. John's wort because it was the only one that was recommended in both areas to help relieve anxiety and depression. And those things are very, very tied together. If you look at side effects of depression, anxiety is going to be one of them. And I find a lot of times, like for men won't necessarily say they're depressed, but they might say, oh, I'm anxious, or there's a loss of apathetic, feeling apathetic, a loss of energy towards things. So all of those, I think, are really significant as far as developing someone to the point where they might really be thinking about suicide. I know a lot of people have passing thoughts of suicide, but that's a whole different, that's not quite at the same level.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes, actually, when you get to that point of just being really, like you said, apathetic or just I remember, and this was years ago, I remember walking into, I love books. I just absolutely love them. And I remember walking into Barnes and Noble where I could spend, but I think there was no half price books maybe, or I was like, no, I want the brand new book so I can highlight it myself. And I remember walking in, if I can't find joy in a bookstore or a library, still love libraries, or on my Kindle nowadays, if I can't find joy there, then that's a good check-in for me that I'm not doing that great. If there's not some topic that I can find that there's something for me, that someone else can teach me something in a book, or I can just enjoy what they have to say, then that was always a good kind of a signpost or a warning sign for me that I might not be in a great place. And I remember walking in to the Barnes & Noble and just looking around in every single section. No, that didn't do anything for me. No, that didn't do anything for me. And I really, to this day, think of that moment as being, a knowing how it feels when someone can just say nothing can bring me joy. And I address a lot with people I understand that it seems like a very selfish act, but I had a friend years ago, and she had 3 daughters. This was years ago, and I'm talking like 20 years ago, okay? And she had 3 daughters, and they knew she had horrific headaches, migraines, just a lot of things in her life. And she had a plan for suicide, and the kids knew it. So it sounds horrible, and it was. I mean, it was very sad that the kids knew. But ultimately, she did carry out her plan. She actually did commit suicide. And I remember everybody saying how selfish she was and how horrible she was. And I would tell them, actually, I would like you to know, and I told those kids, how much she loved you. And it's so hard to understand that she had become convinced by whatever powers there are that you believe in. She had become convinced that she was better off, that they would be better off without her. Now, that's not true. They wouldn't have been. But she wasn't a horrible person. She really was convinced of that. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So she wasn't selfish. There's not a selfish bone in her body. She was convinced. Those voices in her head really had convinced her, or whatever she was thinking, that she was a burden to people, that they would be better off without her. And I want to repeat, that's not true, but yet she wasn't selfish. I don't think mental illness, and a lot of times this is mental illness, unless it's, I'm not an expert in this area, but I do and know quite a bit about it. I do think mental illness is not something that we need to blame the person going through. We need to remove that stigma and help the person that's going through mental illness to be able to say what's going on with them. In fact, I'll just say I read an article about, since we said Kate Spade at the top of the show, the podcast, and of course this is, I can't validate this, but I did read that she had been asked by her sister to go get some help, and for some of the things she was going through, and that she was concerned about the stigma to her brand, to the stigma of her getting help for what was going on with her mentally, to her brand. So whether or not that is a true report or not a true report, that makes sense to me, because there's so much stigma associated with someone getting help for mental illness. I think it's less than it was 20 years ago when I got help, and I did. But I think that it's a good place to start as far as our discussion, and even end, because that's where I think we prevent, or would be further on the road to preventing suicides if there wasn't so much stigma.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that we need to look at too is that a lot of times when people are mentally ill, they might not actually know it. I've worked with clients that have had damage from drugs over the years, and they know they don't function optimally, but they can't even figure out why they can't function optimally. And a lot of times the depression gets so heavy that they can't pull themselves out to begin to get the skills and to begin to be able to trust someone That alone, to build that trust with a therapist, to create that relationship so it can begin to be effective, can take several years. They have to usually go through a period of failure where that therapist stayed with them through it. And a lot of people, you'll see them, they do therapy or something, and they go in for 6 months, and then they're like, oh, I'm better, and they stop. But maybe it's more that temporary fix. And so, I want to bring what we do into with card reading and in our abilities to work with people into what we're looking at. I have found it to be quite overwhelming when I have a client that feels deeply suicidal. And I've had it happen a couple times where I'm dealing with heavy grief. Someone had either passed away or there had been a murder situation, and I'm dealing with a loved one that's left behind. And, my goal is to embrace the soul of who they are and where they're at, and to help them get on a path that is going to bring some level of joy or peace back into their life. I take great responsibility in that. And it's certainly not beneath me to recommend them reaching out to a suicide hotline, to getting a therapist. I recommend all of that because my skill sets are going to be limited, and I'm not someone you see every week. I might see my clients once every 3 or 4 months, or once a year. It depends. So,
so what would you, I think it might help us to dive into a couple of these questions that I received from maybe just to talk about them, because they do kind of tie into how we might help someone. I think they might with a reading. Okay. We had a question regarding, she asked, when you know you won't have the answers you seek, how do you go ahead and move through it? So she feels like sometimes she feels like she won't get the answers that she seeks, but how could she go ahead and move through the situation? Is that clear enough, or do I need to go to the next step?
No. Okay, let's do one, since she gave you multiple questions there. So let's do one for each. And is this person going to be listening? Do they know who they are? Do you want to mention their name?
Yes, her name's Melinda, and she should be listening. So Melinda, these are your questions that I said that we would try to get to. So we're going to get to them now.
Okay. So the first one we have is 3 of Wands. And this is moving through it. It's being part of that journey. But it's also waiting for the answers. It's saying your prayers and waiting on that response to come back. What do you see here?
I see the same thing. I see this person, they're standing there, and I feel like the 3 of Wands is about the options, I think, in this situation anyway. And I believe, Melinda, that, and I've talked to you about this a little bit, and Megan doesn't know the situation, but I would say that even when we don't feel like we have the answers, and we think, okay, I'm never going to get all the answers, that then sometimes that in itself, and I don't mean this to sound crass, but that is the answer, because the answer may be that we're just not meant to know everything or understand everything on this earth plane that we incarnated into. Okay, I just don't feel like, so there's some answers I feel like you aren't getting, and it's not because you're not supposed to hear them and you're not asking them in the right way. I feel like it's just part of your journey, that this person was so special in your life, and you were so special to this person. And I 100% believe that they are helping us from the other side.
Oh,
so
yes,
I feel
I
like
do too.
That's your relationship now. And I know that some people may not understand that, but that's really what I believe. So I don't know that we always will get all the answers.
Oh, I agree.
And it is tough. But the way to move through it, I think, is to then understand our what we're still meant to do here, and then our relationship with the person on the other side, which I do believe in.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I'm looking at here is so this is a very vintage looking deck, and the person is holding on to these staves and they have growth on them, but he's not even noticing that. He's looking out to what's beyond. And, in the distance, there's mountains, but they look like they're just stone. So I want you to really take a moment and pay attention to what's happening around you, because there is life around you and you're kind of missing it right now as you focus on the grief. So pay attention to where you are and who's there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's exactly right. And good word for you, Melinda, or good reading there from Megan.
Oh,
I agree with that, to move on through, because of that life. There's so much life for you, Melinda. Yeah. Now, the next question she asked is, how do we remove the guilt? Even better yet, how would we turn it into something we can use to assist others? So it's about the guilt. Then how do we remove it or turn it into something to assist others?
Okay, so we got 7 of Wands here. And let's see, first off, well, you got to get up and get busy on it yourself. So this is taking action and standing up for what you believe in about all of this too. So you've gained a great deal of knowledge from this experience, and you've got to be able to express that. If you're holding that in and burying it, one, it's going to fester and be unhealthy for you, but you're also not going to be able to help anybody else. It's going to shut you down. Go ahead.
I totally agree. I feel like that, I feel almost as though you have spent a lot of time warding off all the things you feel that have come at you since energetically, since this horrible or horrific thing happened with you, your loss. And so these energies that you feel coming at you, you are still dealing with those. And I feel like I just want you to take the wand in your hand and just knock them down and just say, no more. Just affirmations of no more. And normally affirmations are positive, but really I want there to be a strong stance of, now I'm ready to step into my knowingness of what I've gained from this, because you are strong, Melinda, but I do believe, just like Megan said in the reading before, that there's a lot of life. There's even more in this one. There's a lot of life, but we're real busy hanging back in the guilt. So the way to use it is take the knowledge you have to help others in any way you can. In any way you can. Every time you speak to someone, your smile radiates to them and your soul connects with them, and that could change their day. As corny as that sounds, it could.
Oh, no, that's huge. Well, and the other thing I'm kind of seeing here is also being aware of your anger about the situation. That's another thing. If you're not finding ways to release that, depression is anger that's never been dealt with. And so it's okay to find a way to let that go. And, with this, as a 7 of Wands, feel free to beat that staff, beat the pillow. And I love that we also are looking at staves at wands, because wands correlate with spades in our deck. And of course, Kate Spade was
Kate Spade.
Yeah. In fact, I thought about pulling out all spades for today, but I thought, well, it probably won't read right. It probably wouldn't.
Well,
be
they're
fair
coming anyway.
They're coming anyway.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next one. She says, why is it that others can receive messages from this person who has passed, but I can't receive a message?
Oh, God. I remember my grandmother feeling that way, too, being real frustrated about it.
Yeah, I've had a client recently, same thing, that very frustrated because everybody else is saying they're hearing from them, or they get a message, and then they don't feel like they're hearing anything.
Okay.
So.
Oh, interesting. So we got Judgment. You go first.
Okay, so for me, I often think of the Judgment card as the karma card, the everything coming together karmically. Okay, so that's just for me personally how I read that card often. And I feel like for you, you're actually being called to pull together a lot of this, and I hate to say it, but I think he knows the one who passed was a he. I know that. I think he knows that you now need to step into your own and step forward, as Megan said in this first reading, where the mountains are in front of you, but you can barely see them, and they look like dry lands, but there is something there in front. And he's actually potentially holding back talking sometimes or getting these messages because you really need to step forward. And I think there's some concern that you might not ever step forward if you get a lot of messages from him. Okay, that's what I'm getting. Now, Megan might get something completely different, but I feel you are very tied together, and the communications to take place from, it's not necessarily him coming through from a reader to you or a medium to you or something like that. It's more the signs, and I would ask for a specific sign. My assignment to you would be say something specific, and really for you, I'm going to say, based on this reading today, that I would use something having to do with a wand or even sticks that you gather, and actually just as you walk out in nature, look for those and use those as signs. I think we can determine what our signs are going to be and then start looking for those, and then they'll start coming to us everywhere we go.
Yes.
And so I think that would be very healing to you. I don't know that at this point that you're going to get an audible or inner third eye message necessarily from him. I think you guys were deeply connected anyway, so you're getting messages all the time.
Well, and that's kind of where I was seeing with it, is that actually he has been connecting with you.
I guess that's where it came out at the very end. Yeah, it's just different than what I thought the question was. Yeah.
Right, and it's not the way that, it's maybe not the way you're wanting to hear it, but I do feel like he's constantly with you, and he is sending you signs. And it's okay that you're not picking up on it, but you're wearing your grief, and so you're not living in it's kind of like you're not in the full potential of yourself. If you look at this image, all the people are gray. They're actually bodies here. So you're one of these beings, and we want you in color and full of life. And then you're going to be able to receive his message more clearly. So as you become more active and connected to your world, and I think Michelle is really right, there is such a powerful connection by walking and being one with nature. So, it might be even just going in your own backyard and sitting down quietly and just closing your eyes and listening. Feel the air, listen to the wind blow through the trees, and realize that you're part of that. You're in that moment. You're part of every essence that's going on out there. And that's going to help you to find your messages from this person. Because I feel that he is there, and I think Michelle's right. You look for what your sign is going to be, but I think you're going to start to find this really quickly, because he's never left you. He's very much a presence in your life.
I agree with that. He's very much a presence.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, all right. Did we get all her questions?
We got the questions.
Okay. Well, are we at a wrap for today? Okay. So thanks for joining us, and please continue to Third Eye Think.